You,
Yeah.
us.
I noticed that like the way, and I don't know what the stroke is, that it's kind of like that.
Uh,
I really just landed on it. It's my fall schedule.
The way,
This will fit with the other things
That you're doing?
that I'm doing.
things are focused.
And
Might have been just what you were doing.
at the time I thought it'd be easier to just jump on the launch, finish the practice, keep down here and coach them, but it turned out to be faster to jump in the car and drive down anyway. But commuting by launch is more fun.
That's more fun.
That's good. They might have got it.
Yeah, I can see, because I can see it.
Let's see what they have for dinner.
Like the way you
Good?
like when we left in 2000.
It's like homemade, huh?
yeah, chicken tikis masala.
The way the blade.
This is great.
Yeah, all right.
So a little bit more like a lot more.
So another sort of family go-to. I've done it a couple times with Alex. She found the recipe, and so I was like, all right, give it a different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I know, it's, you know who else it reminds me of? St. Paul's guy. He's pretty loud. Yeah.
Oh,
So that we,
right. Yeah,
I heard him like every time he's outside, out of the van, I could hear him wherever he was.
you save money by not. There was one time like kid says, "Coach, I can't hear you," and he's like, "That's impossible." That is, I mean, he said like that is. Excuse me for profanity. That is. Yeah. Well, they're gonna waste So you were out and you're coaching?
I've been on the dock working on the bargain a lot. Okay. Finally, we're real close. Right? They're all, what was happening is the gunnels, because they're all made from that same fiberglass. I mean, I've watched some of the corporate road people go in there, and you've seen it too.
Show them the latest.
I'll be on the water in the double tomorrow for the first time up here.
Oh, yeah?
This year.
It's gonna
It's gonna be a little cooler than Florida. Yeah. Once I get,
Were you just from Florida?
once I get acclimated, you can make any critical comment you wish. But the first couple of weeks, oh, where have I been all winter?
Are you floating out here or Riverside?
I have a slow but steady doubles partner up here who has his own double. And it's great to practice.
Yeah.
And he's not a bad road, it's just, it's not slow. You know, he pulls an 8:20 to 8:30.
How's the lady doing out there?
But it's great because I can, I rope out, I get all my practice steering, practice anything I want. And he's totally comfortable in any kind of weather. Some people just freak out. And then my faster doubles partner was in New Zealand climbing, so he's not back yet. So I'm hoping he'll be back soon so we can start to practice before the race season. And then I'm gonna unashamedly shop my age down at Riverside. There's some big guys who want to get up into a different age category.
Yeah.
See if that works. We'll see.
Somehow that feels like gaming the system, but I know it's not. But
Oh, but nobody else does that, right? Hey, I'm an eye category. It's gonna be a powerful motivator.
I don't have responsibility for 48.
I've got one, the guy I worked with on the small boats with, Mark Klinker, who's only 60.
Yeah.
He's been 6'4", and he rows long, which I like. You seen him run? Oh, okay.
I think I coached him a little bit this fall.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I didn't know if you had, but I mean, he's more of a, I don't know, is he more of a scholar or more of a sweeper? I don't really know. Let's find out. There's a guy, do you know Bob Lee here, who volunteers a lot with the Paris?
Yeah.
Bob's 6'4", he's 190, and he's fit. what's going on. It's just not, some people work, some don't.
I had a feeling that.
I've only seen regulars with our make room for parents.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right.
I don't think I've seen them the same. Yeah, I mean, he's got a long trunk,
Oh, he's got long legs, he's got
long arms.
long arms, and long, you know, he looks fine. But he's, I don't know, I judge, when I don't feel a boat, you know, when the boat sets, and you can concentrate on getting the oars in and, you know, locking in and going. He's not gonna have to deal with all that
Paid
experience.
vacation, or is it?
It's not that you can't be stable in an unsteady boat, it just, it takes energy away from it. And there's always that shocking surprise. Where'd that
The whole
come from?
time. Well, on a smaller boat, certainly.
Yeah, you can hide in an eight. You can't really hide in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
flies.
yeah.
I
Not
think.
not a ton of time to explore the area.
Fourth of the IRA in 2003. The assistant coach there told me they never took a balance on it.
Yeah.
It's such a,
That's frustrating.
but with this guy I rode with here, it's so nice, because, you know, if we, like,
Yeah,
let
sure.
her run, the boat just goes.
Yeah.
Oars off the water.
My cousin married a guy who's
So
from
we're-
there originally,
Whatever we got, we're maximizing.
and
We're not
they had
losing
like a
anything.
dual
Side to
wedding.
side.
They had a wedding here and a wedding there. And so my whole family.
And
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
I don't.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Depending on what your goals are. I'm not trying to go out and have a nice recreational run.
Yeah, exactly. They just, I mean, it was a wild time. They. It just goes on and on.
Is it official about the
So.
training center?
Unfortunately not. I got the secondhand stories from from my parents. I know.
Okay, 'cause I mean,
It was right during spring
Ellen and I
spring
had a long
last
chat.
year.
The day Patrick was coming
Exactly.
up, but I haven't seen her.
So,
I haven't seen her
unfortunately,
or talked to her since. That'll be
I know.
good news.
So I think ultimately I want
That would be.
Oh,
Find somebody. Or they'll do, you know, some vacation over there.
I mean, there's no better facility, let's face it. I gather there's some, there are gonna be some specific boats allocated.
In a community that understands and
Well, yeah, and I, you know, Alan was asking me, how do I feel about
Noticeable.
coaching people from other clubs, I could care
Yeah,
less.
there's this Indian place
USA
right across the street from one of the boathouses that I used to work at. And so we got like really familiar with the food through that. Like they would have an $11 lunch, all you could eat buffet. And it was like, oh man, we were there all the time.
I've lost my seat here.
There's plenty of room at this table.
I think you're good.
Yeah, the time to get territory. You go over there and you're the wealthiest person in the league. It's pretty awesome.
Everybody's in cocktail party mode.
What's that?
Not me.
Yeah.
Another meeting that's supposed to be going on right now is drill down financials meeting. Heard about that? Well, you were at the annual meeting, right?
Yeah.
I was shocked.
Four. Oh my god. That's insane.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, wow, yeah, so it's basically like reduce everything by half.
It comes up as a
Wow.
round number anyway.
That's crazy.
And I was also shocked at the amount of pushback from the scholars. Prices.
Yeah.
It's been a legacy.
It'd be pretty cool to go over there on vacation. I don't know if they have Airbnb, but you can find like a sweet Airbnb. Yeah. And if that math works out, you can get, you know, $1,000 a night Airbnb for 100. Yeah. Did you guys out there?
Certainly a good one.
Hanging in there a little bit.
Muscle relaxers are doing their
They give you muscle relaxants? Good.
I have my doctor's appointment on Monday morning.
Okay. Progress. so complicated.
I've been harassing Erin for the last my back is jacked up.
I have been noticing that Andy walks a little gingerly these days. Is that what's happening, buddy?
Oh, no. Not good.
Not good, yeah.
Some good reviews, I can make it tell Alex, my wife, that I did a good job on this recipe.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, really?
Very good.
Oh yeah, make sure you guys feel for yourself. Heater! The less I come home with, the better.
Where are you gonna set that thing up, Dave?
I'm just gonna walk around with it.
Oh, you are?
Just gonna see where Erin is. And...
I move, right?
Yeah.
I'm not very
Oh, yeah,
static
No, I
human
want
being.
this should be interactive moving. I saw Bodie
Right
doing
now,
like a
no,
figure
because
four.
You'll see towards the end, my goal is more like
That was a wild night.
in the spring, you don't really get in here. So like, outside. So like,
Yeah, I saw some. I saw.
So good.
I think that's interesting.
They do that, and then
They do a lot of very interesting stuff. I keep things a little more simple than that, to be honest.
I like watching.
I don't know if it's
I
as
think
fun,
it's
but
very. Yeah, it's very interesting.
it is. But my feeling is the more degrees of freedom you give to a teenage boy, the more degrees of freedom you give to a teenage boy to mess up.
Ah,
So the simpler you can keep things for kids, the better they're
interesting.
gonna perform it, and then
Okay.
therefore, I
Oh
mean,
right, just
that-
one or two moves.
you
Right.
have one kid who that could turn into I'm just flexing my back and I'm here and I can't do
It could-
anything and I have no
yeah.
dorsiflexion and I'm hurting my knees and ow this hurts, but they don't want to say anything.
Yeah.
Sounds great in theory,
Yeah. Yeah.
might not be.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's bad exercise. I'm just saying
It looks cool.
that's why I tend to like
freaking hard.
dumb things down a little bit, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, you bet. Great. Awesome.
Are you coaching? Yeah, I'm coaching.
Oh, and if you guys can do me a favor, I'm going to pass around this little clipboard. We got an attendance sheet just so we can keep track of who made it.
Pat, this is great. Thanks for making this.
You're welcome.
Okay.
You know what? I've got
Please invite anybody in there to come enjoy some food. We have tons of food. And some cool information.
I gotta get some.
No worries. Just let it in. Have a poppin'.
Alright.
Good spot. See a lot of rowers there, so
That's good.
I don't hear any commands during dinner.
conveniently located, so it's fun for kids going to and from practice from here. all the
Erin
time,
just has
so-
to. She has a sweet spot. It's
Oh, you found
Oh, I can move.
No,
You're a little.
we lost the sweet spot. There it is.
Connection. It's all about connections.
I didn't even.
Did I just say that?
It's like the angle I think of the wire.
Yeah, it
There it
totally
is.
is. It's like
If you need me to give you maybe a little weight, like like a 2.5 pound plate to like
Oh yeah.
Oh, do you
weigh it down or something.
No, it's
Awesome.
maybe that works.
That
works.
Yeah, it was more like if we did that. Not.
Not helpful. We tried.
That's what it seemed like before.
There we go. There we go. We'll just.
If I'm talking at any point and it goes out, let me know because I might not see.
Part of my price is you have to choose which car I would kill for in the 2 minutes.
right. Okay, got it. Yeah, I'm good. Do you watch? No.
Don't have a TV.
Okay.
My computer's from work.
Okay.
Pardon me, I know, I'm old fashioned.
It's okay. All right.
Read? Like books?
Should we start going? Yeah. Do we just lose someone?
No, Tori stole
Oh, Tori.
stole a couple beverages. She has
Well,
to.
I want to do a little kind of intro
doing
first.
meetings?
So.
Well, yeah, Tom can kind of fill you in on how we run things.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we've been taking it pretty case by case. So yeah, maybe we just kind of go around the room really quick. I think most people have been here once at this point, but we can kind of do a sort of a quick introduction, and then you can do your intro, and then we'll
Sounds
get
good.
started. Want to start down that end? Fire it up.
Oh, hi. I'm Peter, and I'm one of the para coaches for CRI.
I'm Evans. I'm also working with some para athletes. Spend most of my life behind the megaphone.
I'm Sam, and I coach at a high school down the river, and I also coach at CRI.
mostly high school.
I'm John. I'm also part of the para rowing team. I coach in this room.
Bodie, been coaching some of the youth novice programs for a really long time, and kind of been interested to hear what Dr. McConnell has to say about injury prevention.
I am Pat. I'm a novice coach at Wayland Weston.
Andy, CRI novice U17 boys.
And Tom, I'm with the IRL and coaching on the collegiate level.
Sweet. Well, I'm Erin. I'm a physical therapist. Back in the day, second class of the IRL. So I graduated in 2013 from the IRL, so I've spent a lot of time in this building in a very short period of time, and then kind of in and out since then. So I'll kind of start from the beginning, because I think that really defines who I am now as a PT and what I do and why I like doing what I do. But I grew up in Connecticut, and I started rowing at my public high school in Connecticut, where all you could do was row in the fall and spring. I swam in the winter. In the summer, I don't even know what I did. I think I played some tennis. But and then from there, went and rowed at Notre Dame. I had a pretty good career there, but sophomore fall was out the whole fall with a back injury that has then kind of been on and off pretty much since then. And we see that's a pretty common thing, college athletes, back pain, 78% chance they're gonna have back pain later in life. So that to me was like, let's stop that from happening and get that better, because my experience with PT or athletic training or any of the care that I got when I was an injured rower was horrible. The person I was working with had no idea what rowing even was. He was mostly focused on the soccer team. And I think that to this day, that's probably why I still have some issues on and off, because it never fully got healed when it should have. And so that's when I said, yeah, I don't just want to be a PT. I want to start working with these rowers and make it so that, first of all, hopefully they don't get injured in the first place, but if they do, that they can come and see someone like me who actually gets what they do and can actually assess their movement and say, hey, we need to fix this, versus just like, hey, go sit on some heat and stim, because it's probably all you need. So yeah, from there I came to the IRL, and then went on to get my doctorate at UConn in physical therapy, and I've been in Boston since then, and I now work at Spalding, Brighton, which is kind of like 5 minutes down the street. We see a lot of rowers, so it's a ton of fun. I'm really enjoying being there, seeing a lot of different age levels of rowers, juniors, masters. It's really great. So back in my glory days with Bodie and the novice girls up there, I had a lot of fun actually going through old pictures of myself coaching. So I think it's hilarious. I look back, I'm like, I need to put my hair down when I'm coaching. It's a little bit of a diva. So that's me. But I wanted to kind of kick it off with what injuries you guys see. So that was kind of the first discussion question that was posed by Tom and Pat. And I just wanted to know, kind of start it off, what are you guys seeing? And we'll go from there. So you said, Pat, that you have a list of all the things that all of your kids have been telling you all of their ailments.
We got lists.
So my kids, in their words, say back pain upper, mostly lower. One kid who I don't know ended up having elbow surgery due to a rowing injury, I was told. One kid, or at least one kid, said hamstring, but from running for rowing.
Okay.
And knee pains, so more than one. Knee pain.
Okay. So it sounds like a lot of backs, but also some knees and an elbow, which is a little more rare. But
Yeah.
it's a body part that you need when you're rowing, because it's a whole body sport. So why not? Anyone else got anything?
I was gonna say we often have kids that come in with prior knee stuff, or they say that, oh, I can't run, right? Like my doctor told me not to run because of I have patellofemoral disorder, blah 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 blah. So yeah, so there's usually out of 40 kids, there's usually like 3 of those
Right.
that I can recall.
Because the interesting thing with that is that, I don't know about your experiences with rowing. Rowing to me, one of the reasons I love it so much is because it's that sport for kids who often aren't good at other sports. And that's not meant in any bad way, because rowers are some of the best athletes ever. But, I mean, my parents joke with me all the time that, you know, we never would have guessed that you would have been the Division I athlete in the family, because my brothers are both kind of all-star lacrosse players in high school, and I, you know, just kind of grew up being like, let's soccer, like, I don't know how to kick this ball. So yeah, that's something that when you see this novice team, and you have them all in front of you who, like, especially if they're just starting rowing when they're, you know, maybe 8th grade, maybe a freshman in high school, they're probably going to have a history of some stuff that might have come along from the sports that they did before that. So, totally. Anything else?
Sciatic nerve.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, probably at that point related to the back, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of potential reasons why you're getting that nerve pain, numbness, tingling, whatever it is, kind of down the leg, can be back, can be true sciatic nerve. But yeah, that's, you know, we'll talk a lot about how rowing is mostly moving through the hips, moving through the back, even though sometimes we don't necessarily want it as much, but yeah, so you get a lot of load through there.
And some stress fractures, more in women rowers.
Yes, yeah,
Ribs.
definitely those ribs.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead, Caroline.
Been hearing a bit about this past winter, stress from feathering,
Yeah.
kind of like carpal tunnel-ish type, like grip issues.
Right, exactly. Especially, you'll see that mostly with that transition back onto the water with all of a sudden, all winter, all winter you've been here and you haven't had to do any wrist extension, and then the second you get on the water, you're doing that over and over, and that's often we always call that this like spring break injury, because that was like the one thing that all the kids ended up in the trainer's room with over spring break, because everyone had these like, we call it the egg, like had this massive egg on their forearm because tendons just, everything swelled up and got really inflamed. So yeah, totally wrist stuff, especially this time of year of kind of getting back on the water and doing a lot more wrist movement. So for sure.
Just building on what Pat's saying, for the para group, I know that some kids come in with like already sort of weak wrists, so for them like it amplifies a little bit more. So we use like active hands, but I'm wondering if there's like a different way we can go about like remediating stress on that area, like if there's like a wrapping method or something that's better than active hands that you might know of.
Yeah.
That'd be great to know.
Yeah, I think, so are these athletes that are they leg shrunken arms, or are they just shrunken arms, what are they?
It's all of them.
All
It's
of them.
usually legs, trunk, and arms that have the weaker wrists.
Yeah.
And the legs and trunk are fine, yeah.
My question would be, where's the load going? If the load's all going into the wrist because the wrist is weak, then that's gonna cause problems, but what's going on up the chain? What's going on through the shoulder? Because if you're taking a load and you can't lock that shoulder blade in and really get the load in through there, and if they have weak wrists already, they probably have some proximal stability issues as well, but address it up the chain, kind of see, okay, sure, you can put the brace on there and that kind of thing to help it out, but really you don't want all that load going through the hand. You want it to be a looser grip and really kind of loading that shoulder. So that's what I would question, is like that death grip is usually the sign of like you can't actually support much up there. But we can definitely chat about it kind of as we go through some other things too, if you have any other questions about it. Any other questions or any other injuries people are seeing that we haven't really talked about? Yeah, stop.
Maybe not necessarily an injury, as in something like acute, but a lot of rounded shoulders, really tight chest, just from being in this position and being in that forward position.
For sure. And so we'll definitely address that as we go, because that's going to be really important too. If you've been here so much, that's going to not only affect the lumbar spine, but then also go on to, if you're a sweep rower, you've been here all winter on that erg and you have a super stiff thoracic spine, and then you go and say, okay, well you need to rotate. That's going to be a challenge. So yeah, definitely a good point. Anything else at this point? So we're going to talk about backs, because that is hands down number one, the most common thing you'll see. And as Pat said, it was just like backs, but mostly lower, and that's going to be the most common. You guys said a lot of really great stuff, but I feel like if you actually, if you thought about the most injuries your team has had, it's probably happened this repetitive movement with load. I mean, anytime you do a repetitive movement and you add load to it, it could be problematic. Now, think about the rowing stroke. You need to have the max amount of hip flexion, the max amount of knee flexion, pretty much the maximum amount of dorsiflexion of your ankle at the catch. And now, you need to do all of that while keeping your pelvis vertical. Sounds really great, sounds super ideal, right? And if that happens, like, the spine is totally fine and can handle that load. But like, what rower has the full amount of hip flexion, full amount of knee flexion, full amount of ankle dorsiflexion, and then can control that and keep their pelvis vertical and then load that appropriately? Probably very few. And that's why there's actually these injuries. So when we talk about that pelvic position, I love this picture from Row Fishent from Sarah Hendershot. Actually, I went to high school with her. So I love using this picture when I talk about pelvic position and rowing because it really shows us the little nuances that we need to pay attention to. So we're looking for that neutral pelvis on the bottom. So when you're there, you're kind of sitting right on those sit bones. You can actually work through the hips, get those glutes turned on, and the spine is in a pretty neutral position. Now, it's going to be a little flexed, and that is totally fine and totally expected, given the amount of flexion through the hip and flexion through the knee. But, you know, it's pretty neutral. But if you flip the pelvis the other way, you go into a lot of anterior pelvic tilt, or you flip the pelvis the other way and go into a posterior pelvic tilt, that's going to throw things off. The load's not going to be able to stay where you want it, and it's going to kind of throw off that whole chain all the way up, and then all the way back down. If there's any questions at any point, definitely stop me. I wanted this to be a discussion-based thing. I kind of threw slides up there just to kind of keep me organized and keep me on track with what we're talking about. So if at any point you guys are like, I don't get this, or what do you think about this? Please chime in. We're a small enough group that there's no problem with that. Yes, Bodie.
I just like I was just talking to Sam on the subtle differences between movements that look correct and movements that are a little bit less correct or whatever, body saving or body whatever. And even when I look at those photos up there, like I'm trying to figure out what portion of her body to look at to determine how I can see if she's actually like tilted, like posterior tilt or anterior tilt.
Yeah.
Because to me they look. The only thing I can see in the top left corner is that she's like looks like over compressed.
Right.
Right, and then the next shot, it like if I look at her lower back area, it has that same curve, and I can't even tell based on like the line of her shorts.
Yes.
Because it looks so similar.
Great question.
Yeah.
I love this picture for everything else except for that because it's not super noticeable.
Yeah. Really subtle.
We're gonna do some video review in a minute, and we're gonna look at people who do both of these things because they're both pretty common. And the other thing I'm gonna say about that too is that ask, right? Like a lot of those things are subjective. Like, are you sitting on your sit bones? Are you sitting on the fleshy part of your butt? Are you sitting on the fleshy part of your hamstring? Where are you sitting? Because that is actually really important. I have them get off the rowing machine. We actually do a lot of our stuff in the clinic on our Pilates reformer. We kind of stick people on there and like use that almost like John's seen it before. It's a pretty cool thing. And it's really interesting to see where people want to sit. Even on that. Most of the time to me are tucked under and I need to actually cue them to like stick their butt out behind them, and that actually brings them to neutral. It doesn't even take them into anterior. I see anterior a lot less. It's usually that posterior where they're just like super tucked under the whole time. So, does that answer your question? I don't love this, but this static picture is really tough to see, but if this was dynamic, you would be able to kind of see, especially as soon as that drive is initiated, that the loading pattern just totally changes. Yeah, Tom.
I was just gonna say, one way I feel like I've kind of learned to understand it is for posterior, it's they're sitting so their weight's on the back axle of the seat. And for anterior, they're sitting so their weight's on the front axle of the seat.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to find basically your weight balance
That's
in between the two axles.
That's a super great way to talk about it. Like I said, I tend to see people who are very much posterior pelvic tilted, and so I tell them to pretty much like push the seat out behind you. And that tends to help. Now, you don't want to tell someone to push the seat out behind them if they're already in an anterior pelvic tilt, but I think talking about the seat itself is a really cool way to do it. So I've never heard that. That's really great.
Those rowers are general population sitting in the way you described.
Actually, great point. So rowers tend to sit in anterior pelvic tilt, or posterior pelvic tilt, sorry. Most people, I would say, especially your high school female novice population, Super anterior pelvic tilt, total sway back, tons of extension, locked out knees, and then you need to bring your hips back, tuck your ribs down, engage your obliques, engage your core, and they're like, what do you want me to do? This is straight? Yeah. So I find that most humans actually are in a lot of anterior pelvic tilt. But then you see rowers that go sit and they just, everything tucks under. Makes sense? Pelvic tilting, we can totally go over it more later. So we talked about the ideal, full hip flexion, full knee flexion, pretty much full dorsiflexion. Keeping your pelvis in neutral. Sounds fine and dandy. But then with fatigue, and fatigue was actually measured using lactate levels. With fatigue, there was less movement through the hips, but that's what we want. We want movement through the hips. So with fatigue, you get less movement through the hips and more spine flexion. And then here's the other kicker, more side bending. This was done on an erg. You don't need to side bend on an erg, right? So that's where this gets problematic because you have all of these athletes on the ergs in the room next door all winter doing tons of loading with that sort of extra flexion, extra side bending, and then you put that with the fact that 94% of rowers have actual hypermobile spines. They move a little more than they should, and you're loading a hypermobile spine more than it should be, and then you get 39% of back injuries that actually happen in the winter because of that.
Did they become hypermobile because of rowing?
Great question. The study didn't specify. I think that is likely true.
Yeah.
Going back to what Tom was talking about, and this is where I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit more. This. It's called regional interdependence. So if you have one segment, one area of your body that's more stiff, i.e. you're here a lot, that thoracic spine is getting super stiff, somewhere's gotta give. You gotta move somewhere. It's usually kind of like adjacent segments, i.e. lumbar spine. Everything down there has to move more because somewhere has to move. So I do think it's more of an effect versus, was there beforehand. I think rowers have just these crazy body types, right? We're like, yes, very much here. They spend so much time moving in this sagittal plane, especially on the rowing machine, and then they just adopt this kind of rounded shoulders, stiff thoracic spine, hypermobile lumbar spine, and then you ask that to twist into load, and it can be problematic. Any questions about that? Cool. So at this point, it's not winter anymore, it's spring, thankfully. So if most of these back injuries are gonna occur in the winter, you're kind of just getting off of that, right? So you might have these kids or athletes, no matter what population you're coaching, that are coming off of having an injury in the spring, or in the winter. Now you're like, okay, great, it's the spring, like you couldn't erg, but now you can row, like hop back on the water. Sometimes it doesn't work so well because of all the things you just talked about the rotation and stuff like that, which we'll get into a little bit more later. But there's a lot of factors that it's not just, oh, the erg loads you more, and now you're going on the water, like, you'll be fine. Something to look out for. Anyone kind of experiencing that right now, like kids who were injured over the winter, and now they're kind of getting on the water, and you're trying to kind of like test the waters and be like, okay, you doing okay? Like, you doing okay?
That's how it goes. No one's hurt once you're on the water.
Right.
That window before the water, like that's when everyone's the most hurt.
Gotcha.
And then like suddenly the week that we're on the water, everyone's feeling like a lot better.
And we're feeling better.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of psychosocial
Yeah.
stuff involved with that. I can't say that as, I'm sure all of us who did row at any sort of competitive level understand that, right? Like, your back always feels a lot better when you're on the water than it is doing the two count in the erg, and ouch, it hurts, I have to stop, like, but I can do it on the water, it's fine. There's something to be said about that. The erg does put more load on your body, and we'll see later, there's some components of it that could be more psychosocial. absolutely, because there's that stigma about that machine, just tricky.
Bodhi grabbed one in case you want to demo it.
Oh, perfect. We can demo something at some point, unless.
Are you gonna demo that?
Well, it could be, because I'm really good at slouching.
Let's do it in a little bit.
Okay, okay.
Give yourself credit, Dutchman. Make me train as such.
So we know, especially backs. I mean, we can talk any other stuff right now, but I kind of want to know what you guys are doing with your teams, with your athletes right now, that you're calling injury prevention or prehab or whatever the term you apply to it is. What are you doing to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't happen? I mean, there's like a massive list of what this could be. It doesn't need to be like X program or X exercise. Like, what are you doing about it?
I'm addressing transfer.
Go.
Addressing transfer of abdominals
Mm-hmm.
and trying to get them to do all different types of movement and engaging them,
Sweet.
as well as, stretching hands and hip flexors.
Cool. When you say abdominals, are there any in particular that
So
you're
we're
like
working on the
trying to?
transverse abdominals is what
Sweet.
we're working on.
Nice.
And, giving them homework, like engage them during your school day when you're walking from
Yeah.
point A to point B and.
Which is great because especially with any sort of student athlete, I'm gonna have a ton of time to go and do a ton of extra stuff on their own. And we're gonna get to efficiency with this kind of stuff later. But the more you can incorporate that stuff into their day, the number of times a day I tell certain patients of mine, like, when you're brushing your teeth, you're gonna stand on one foot. Like that kind of thing. Like actually incorporate it into things that you already have to do during your day so that you're not like devoting extra time to it, because often that's unrealistic. So that's awesome that you're doing that. Yeah.
I tell the girls that when they're standing around, they have to squeeze their glutes.
Yeah.
Activate their glutes. And also to make sure that they're not standing with sassy hip.
Yes.
So make sure that they're centered.
Sassy is like just
Sassy.
as common as
Yeah,
that.
exactly. And also when they're activating their glutes, make sure they're not doing that,
Right.
but like,
Yeah. Right, exactly. Perfect. Yeah. Again, kind of just starting to turn on those muscles. And we'll talk about how to apply that to rowing in a bit. But yeah, just even getting them turned on. Because I see a lot of athletes that walk in my door that don't even know where to find those muscles. So you're already like one step ahead if you're like, hey, squeeze them, like know where they are. And if you're sure that that's what they're doing, then it's a good place to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that leads me to a question.
Yeah.
So if Kara has her athletes doing that, do they actually know when they actually are doing it and when they're not doing it? In other words,
Yeah.
you might say squeeze your glutes, and they might think they're squeezing their glutes, but in reality they're actually not squeezing their glutes, they're squeezing something else, or they're like,
Right.
I don't know, they're
Good point.
holding their breath or something and they think they are, but they're not.
Yes.
Like, how would you ever check for understanding and like know that they're actually
Safe
Right.
force
doing
in
it?
mind too, right?
Right, exactly. And that's always something that I joke with my patients sometimes, and saying like, okay, I'm just gonna palpate your glutes and to see if they're firing. Like, is that okay? Because you guys can't do that. Like, to be like as coaches, you cannot. As a patient in a PT clinic or as a PT, I can if needed, and I feel comfortable with it, and the person feels comfortable with me doing it. I can palpate to see if they're turning on. You guys can't. But I think there are some exercises and things like that that you can, like, great, squeezing your glutes here is good, but when in the rowing stroke do you actually need to be completely upright and firing those?
Well, the finish. So I tell them think about the finish, or when they come up from a squat
Mm-hmm.
and you
True.
fire your
Yes.
pelvis
Coming up from a
forward.
squat, you definitely do. At the finish, you're still a little bit flexed
Yeah.
forward. Like it's more, here. It's not 0 degrees. So that's the interesting thing too, is that yes, that's absolutely wonderful, but are they actually then able to turn it on in other places? Because that glute, for some people, can fire really great here, and it can fire really great here, and it can fire really great here. And then as soon as you get to here, it's like, well, where's my glute? I have no idea where that muscle is. It's all about trying to get it to fire in different ranges of that muscle, and that can be really tricky to pinpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about that later, because it's a couple slides down the line. It doesn't really matter. We can kind of get there, but essentially, yes, that's the tricky part. It's like, how do you know if you're doing this functionally? I rely a lot on verbal cues and verbal feedback from the person. So I think that's really important, is like, what do you feel here? And putting them in a position and putting certain loads on them in certain positions that allow them to feel it more, and then slowly taking those like crutches away. So whether it's a band somewhere, or I'm giving them resistance at a certain part of the stroke, or that kind of thing, to like get them to have to turn on, and then slowly peel that away and say, okay, now can you still keep it on, even though you don't have that little like crutch, that little assist. So that's typically what I do for that kind of thing, but those glutes are hard. They're very hard. And to me, they are the hands down, no questions asked, most important muscle that you need for rowing. Like, the core is great, but I think the glutes are so underutilized. And it's crazy because it should all be through the hips. Like, you need to brace your core, you need to do that. But if you're not actually loading through your glutes, which are the biggest, the strongest muscle in your body, in theory, then it's really problematic. And I joke with my patients sometimes that I think I rode and then coached for 9 years. And when I was a rower myself, had never heard one of my coaches ever tell me that I needed to use my glutes. Ever. Now, I think the group of coaches that's in here is probably better at that than mine were, and that's not to say they were bad coaches, but I think especially with, back in high school, it's tough. You're managing all these people, you don't really know what to say, you're just trying to get them to not fall out of the boat, like, let alone, like, get your glutes on. So that can be super challenging, but super important. You need to ingrain that pattern early. Especially working with novices. I worked with novices with Bodhi, and it's something that, like, if you don't get them to feel that then, they have a really hard time breaking those patterns down the line.
It's interesting because Sarah Hendershot gave a talk here.
Yeah.
Were you in that talk?
I was in that talk.
Okay, so she talked about glute dominant and quad dominant rowers. And there were a ton of massive
many.
quad dominant rowers with no glutes.
So many. And I see that a lot.
At a very high level rower.
Absolutely. It's so common. You could be rowing for as long as Sarah has and see very elite people, or I have patients that are either novices, they did other sports, that kind of thing, where like they just aren't here. I have a dancer right now who like cannot find those muscles. I don't think has ever accessed them in her whole life, and her quads are like on fire. And she has bilateral patellofemoral syndrome, but like can't find her glutes at all. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for athletes to figure out where those muscles are, because they're not intuitive. They're not intuitive, but they're so important. Other muscles, the glutes are super important, and I do think the core is important. But the question is, what muscles? Because you see so many athletes doing a ton of planks, doing crunches, doing sit-ups, doing even like, there's so many interesting core exercises going on in every boathouse across America. But are they actually activating the right things? Because that's super key too. You mentioned the transverse abdominis, super important, looks like a corset. That one's really great, but it doesn't necessarily produce any movement, so it can't go through the drive. But you need to work other things as well, and those are worked in different ways. Obliques, often misunderstood. I would say I actually misunderstood them in the early part of my career as well. You think about obliques and you're like, I'm doing tons of Russian twists. This is going to be really great. No. It does rotation, and it does, I don't even want to call it flexion, but essentially if they both contract at the same time, you get that, really bad posture correction. That's what the obliques do, external obliques, when they contract bilaterally. So super important muscle, especially if we're talking about how so many of these rowers just stand like this all the time, and they don't know how to get those muscles on, and they initiate, we'll see a video later, they initiate that drive through their back because they have no extension control. They can't control that back extension, and that causes problems. Multifidi, you can kind of see, sorry, picture is kind of small. They run down the spine. They're kind of little muscles, but relatively big given what they do. I'm confused, buddy. Do you have a question?
Yeah, how do they differ from the
They actually attach to the facets. They attach to the actual joints, and therefore are super important for stability of the spine, and they're the counter for those really strong, like rectus abdominis kind of flexor muscles. They oppose, that's like a bird dog, anytime you're kind of going into alternate arm and leg, anything where you're kind of controlling rotation, but keeping the spine neutral. They don't do a ton of like actual concentric movement. They do a lot of like little bitty control movements, but super important. And we talked about the glutes, glute med, glute max. Glute max, big hip extender. They have patellofemoral pain, they can't run, they can't do this because then they go squat and they do that. That's your glute med. You gotta get it on. Any questions about muscle groups? Because my stat earlier about 94% of rowers having hypermobile spines, this stuff is really important. Because if you don't have this, those hypermobile spines are just gonna keep getting loaded over and over. So, great, all well and good. We've talked about this a little bit so far, but like, can they activate those muscles and then do it in the rowing stroke? Can they do it functionally? And that's the trickiest part. Now, we could do a whole lecture on recovery. A lot of what works summit this year was on recovery and all that stuff. We can talk about volume, and we'll give my little shtick about volume at the end, but that's kind of a whole nother lecture. Kind of in the confines of this right now, the way we're going to prevent injury is by loading with proper technique. You can do all the exercise, but if you can't then apply it to that machine or to the boat, that gets really tricky. And I have to say that is a very tough thing to do. So I think the best way of doing that is through either video or just kind of watch your athletes. You know, it's hard when you have a room of 40 to 50 kids to watch them and actually look at each one and say, you're doing that, you're doing that. But like, oh my gosh, you're over there like falling and doing all these things. Like it's tough, it's really tough. But also we talked about asking the right questions. Are you feeling this way? What do you feel here? What do you feel here? They'll tell you. They will tell you, yes, because they don't want to disappoint you. Right? I have to tell that to my patients a lot. Like, do you actually feel them, or are you telling me what I want to hear? Because sometimes they do, especially these high school athletes that walk in my door, and I build this rapport with them, and you know, it's tough to then be like, do you feel this here? And they don't want to say no because then they think I'm going to be disappointed in them, but I'm not at all. I just want to make sure they're doing it correctly, and so I kind of set that expectation from the beginning. Like, I want you to actually tell me what you feel, and if we try 10 different exercises and you just feel your quads working, then that's not what I want at all. And I don't care if it's number 9 and you're like, oh, are you getting tired of me telling you it's my quads? No, I want you to actually tell me what you're feeling because we're not doing the right thing and we need to figure it out. So we're going to do some video. Hopefully we can see the TV a little bit. So for the record, all of these people in these videos have given me permission to do this and to talk about them a little bit. I'm not going to use their names, but we're going to look at them. Like I said, they did give me permission, so I'm not breaking any hip rules or anything like that. So hopefully these work. When I have an injured athlete, an injured rower, I usually request a video of them actually erging, because we don't have an erg in our clinic. Like I said, we get really creative, and I actually find that it is a wonderful thing, and it actually helps a lot. But why not see them in the middle of a piece? This next video is literally didn't know he was being filmed. And then the second one, he has a second video, and he did know he was being filmed, and it looked a little bit better, but this is a 500-meter piece. And if you don't know anyone's watching you, and this is how you're rowing, it's not a great thing. So I usually, if possible, have it be without the person knowing, although that can be challenging, because I typically want a view from the side and then a view from the front, because you can actually see a lot also in that sagittal plane too, especially if someone's got knee issues, hip issues, anything like that. You see a lot of that disconnect. Yeah, exactly. So video, and I love it when I can get it in slow motion, because then you can really kind of like go nice and slow through it. These videos are not in slow motion, but we will try to kind of pause it where appropriate. So I'm gonna go to the next one, and we're gonna look at it. I think it should be a click to start.
It's right
Easy
here.
target, varsity guys.
Yeah. So, like I said, varsity guys, we're looking at my friend in the blue shirt. I'm gonna hit play, and I want you to just watch. I'll kind of play it over and over a couple times. And again, like I said, this kid, when I asked him if I was using this video, and he's like, "Are you using the good one or the bad one?" And I was like, "I'm using the bad one only to prove a point, but then what I like about it is that the second video, when you actually knew you were being filmed, you did better, which is great, and then you can make the changes." I don't have the second one in here, but we'll take a look at this. Gonna work? Is it going? Yeah.
You're selling out like one of the nicest kids on the team right now.
I
know, I'm joking.
This is one of the kids that I like told him, and I was like, please, like I love him too. He's wonderful. I'm gonna X out of this mode that I'm in and hope that I can just kind of play it. I knew this was gonna happen. Where's my mouse?
You want to mirror it?
Yeah, you're not sure how to do that. Because it works when I just play it from the actual PowerPoint. Like if I hit. Sorry, everyone at home.
Here's your mouse. You see the
Slideshow button?
if you just pull it up.
Sorry.
Where is the
Show me right now.
Arrangement? Are you trying to mirror? Arrangement? Yeah. And duplicate. Yeah.
There we go.
Cool.
Cool. So now you're good. Okay.
Okay, so this should.
helps.
So now I can go right into the PowerPoint. Right? Okay. You ready? Yeah. Okay, one more time. What do we got? What do we see?
Very extended.
What do we think?
He overcompresses, and
Yeah.
that puts him in a bad position at the start.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't tell.
Again?
Yeah.
So it's on mute because the music the boys play is obscene. He showed me that video and I was like,
Oh, yeah.
can we mute this?
Sing 5 songs every day.
Definitely leading with the shoulders.
Yeah.
So,
But he's very like,
Yes.
yeah, comparatively to the person who's sitting just to the right.
And he's all torso.
Okay, so
Yes.
there's a long lever there.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's another point too, that
Yeah.
everyone has a different anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something to pay attention to because how many boys are in that room at that and at this practice? Like how many kids are in there?
65 to 70.
65 to 70.
Crazy.
Tough. I mean, he's wearing a bulletproof shirt, which makes him like stand out a little bit, but not enough that like a coach is gonna pop over and say, "Hey, I know you're having some issues with XYZ. Like, let's take a look at this because if you're doing 8x500 like this, and then he comes to see me and has some issues, that's why, right?" So, things that we're seeing again. I love this video for the point of example. This kid is the sweetest kid ever, and he gave me approval for it, knowing that we were gonna like nitpick it and make it better. So, yeah.
So what do you see?
So what do I see? That's what I was gonna get to. So what I'm looking at is, well, here's the question that I wanted to ask before I say that, because I'm gonna give some stuff away. What do you think his primary complaint is? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You can kind of tell from just watching what he's doing that he's got some back stuff. And Yeah, the main thing that I see that jumps out at me right away is when we go back and we say, okay, well, where is he taking the load? Like, where is that load going? He is, before he even thinks about extending his hips and actually kind of straightening his knees, the first thing he does is go, boom.
So he ignites all those muscles.
Everything.
And then holds them through the whole.
Yes. So if we kind of look at it again, and I'll see if I can pause it. So he's there. So
Yeah, there.
that's mid-drive, and he's already completely perpendicular.
He's at half slide.
Right.
It's a double for a guy like Peter in the stylus stroke that we teach, where we have the body open against the legs pretty early in the stroke relative to a lot of people. It's like double that for guys like Peter. Because he can't get in the right positions, and he might not be understanding it correctly. So now that the guys that row the way that we want them to row incorrectly are shoulders out of the stern immediately. Like that's all. And the tweak is, do they understand it, or are they not in the right positions?
Right,
Like,
and that's the thing too, is like, is the message that you're saying, like you're telling your athletes about that kind of stuff, is it being understood by every single person in that room?
Yeah.
Because it may not be, but it's hard to know when there's 70 kids in there, and you're just trying to make sure that like everyone's learning the piece when they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Has he grown a lot in the last year?
Yes.
An inch or two, and probably lost like 30 pounds too at the same time.
To me, that looks like he just doesn't know
Probably
how
so.
to, he doesn't know how to feel his body weight.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. No, not athletic whatsoever.
And if
Like,
all those things
yeah.
are
He's not
in
someone
flux,
that
it's,
you're
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
But if anything, he's slightly forward. But so I'll tell the room. So remind me of your name. Peter asked me, is this athlete in anterior pelvic tilt or is he in posterior pelvic tilt? And I said, he's actually does a decent job of being upright. He actually does. If anything, he's one of those kids that's slightly anterior that I wouldn't tell, hey, stick your butt out behind you a little bit more. Those posterior, we're going to see another one of those later. That'll be a little bit more obvious. Any other questions about this one? I mean, this is one that it's a tough situation because there's just always, there's a lot going on. And that's going to be one of the kind of takeaways that I give you guys is even if you have to kind of watch every kid, and even if that video is 10 seconds, in 10 seconds, could you have figured out that he doesn't necessarily get what's going on? Yeah. And so you split all the coaches in the room in 10 seconds. Look at them. Because you'll see something like this, and that will really, it could potentially impact that athlete's injury.
He did a good job being proactive about stuff and the stuff you guys do. I don't remember him spending any time on the bike this winter.
Yeah.
He like, I don't know if he had stuff that was bothering him. He didn't express it too much, and he like went to you and like he heard the whole winter. He didn't spend like 4 weeks on the bike at all. And
Exactly.
he's here until an hour after every winter practice in here doing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. He's wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're gonna get at too. Is like you could do all the right stuff in here. You could do all the right exercises, but what are you actually doing when you're trying to apply it? And that's the missing piece in this case. Again, wonderful kid, wonderful rower. Sounds like, which I didn't realize that was almost like a little misunderstood message because I had seen him before and seen other videos of him and that was not happening. So potentially it's a newer thing. Interesting to know. Any other questions about this one? Got a couple more. This place, I promise, is just really weird. You can thank Carl for that. So, guy in the end. Watch and let me know what you see. Let me know what you think his primary complaint is.
Oh, his knees are
Yeah, his
like
knees are,
buckling in.
yeah, his knees are definitely coming in.
At the beginning of the drive.
There'll be a lot of forearm shoulder pain.
Say that louder.
Oh, I said he drives with his shoulders, so I feel like there'd be a lot of forearm and shoulder pain.
Yes. Anything else that you see?
Watch it again.
Yeah?
He's got valgus going on too, doesn't he?
very jerky.
Look at the tension in his forearms.
Oh, yeah.
So I like where this video is pausing. Any other questions, comments before I kind of share? I like where this video is pausing because I also want you to look at what's happening with his wrists. So that's his finish.
Shouldn't his wrist be lower?
Yeah. What I just think is interesting is looking at one side versus the other. Because I'm actually,
The right isn't too bad, the left.
Yeah, right. The watch side.
which is interesting because I'm actually treating him for his right wrist. So yeah, that right wrist looks normal, but if you know that it's actually like an ulnar-sided wrist issue and he's just coming in and compressing there, and then he's loading his shoulders and he's loading his forearms and he doesn't have that connection through his scapula, through his core. We already said his knees are going in. So there's definitely missing links, and it's leading to wrist pain. Now, there's a history of other things involved, but it mostly aggravates him with rowing. Mostly on the water issue as well. But an interesting thing, and I'm glad you guys picked out the shoulders, because that can be something that can be challenging to see when someone isn't necessarily connected through here. And that's when you see that like upper track dominance. And this is definitely one of those athletes that we try to release his pec minor and like it's on fire because he in life is just very rounded here. And that's because everything back here is just not kicking in the way we want it to. So threw a little wrench in there, threw a little wrist one, but.
So that's interesting though. So because that's the source of the problem isn't necessarily the obvious thing. Like, it looks okay, like it looks fine,
Right.
but everything else is so bad that thing that would have been okay.
That not every bad technical thing is an injury.
Right.
Could this be the same thing happening and you sit and actually you're treating him for his knee? Absolutely. Because I see that a lot too. No glute med, everything's here. Super internally rotated. Can't get those glutes on and get externally rotated. That's very common.
No.
But just not what I'm seeing this guy for. I've seen this guy for.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this isn't totally wrist related, but I've heard both reputable coaches talk about like different sides of finish. Like, it's like someone told me like a Washington coach was like, oh yeah, like we like to finish like this, and then I've seen like a lot of like Boston national team coaches go like, you should finish like that, and like they're both very different actions.
Yes.
And I feel like the wrist alignment changes based on this. Someone's going to be like, this is stronger, but then this has better clearance.
I think it is different styles. I think in a case like this, either he's okay on his outside arm with the actual outside arm finish, because even here, if you still drew a straight line kind of from the center of the elbow all the way down the middle of the hand, the wrist is still in a neutral position, and you come back here, and it's still neutral in terms of side to side. But yeah, you might get a little, are they at the finish kind of coming in and like dumping back like that, or is it kind of a true like pull back with the wrist neutral? Because that would change things a little bit.
It's mostly just like, I was mostly thinking like wrist to elbow, because there's people talk about both, and some people are like, yeah, like have this chicken wing out,
Right.
and other people are like, no, this is actually a stronger position.
Yeah.
Because you can't actually pull strong like this.
Interesting.
If you're the Cincinnati Juniors, you coach your kids to finish through like this, but with their thumb on top of the oar to relieve wrist pressure as you pull through there. Like that's the style it's actually taught. The thumb's on top. Yeah, it's wild. It's wild to watch.
Yeah. What I'd be interested with that is like, I'd be wondering if there's any more shoulder issues with finishing like this, because anytime you're pulling straight back like that, you're getting that like anterior glide of the shoulder, everything's dumping forward, and if you can't get back and control it like that, which is tough, and you get forward and you dump it, like think about how the front of my humeral head is here, and I pull back and I'm here, that's great. If I pull back and I'm here, that's just dumping forward, putting a lot of stress on that rotator cuff and the long head of the biceps, on a lot of stuff there. So that's something I'd wonder is like, yeah, that sounds stronger, but I wonder muscularly if that's causing any other imbalances in places or anything like that.
If you saw the videos of the boat race last year, especially the Cambridge women, they were finishing here.
Yeah.
They were not pulling through.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they were so fast and
Yeah.
so smooth.
So they were almost like finishing what we would consider like short. They weren't going in all the way.
You know, my sculling coach has me finish here. Because once the oar's past 31 degrees off the horizontal, you start to get drag.
Yeah.
Hold it, and if you're pulling in here, which is very much a CRI thing, finish.
Yeah.
You cannot tap down, you've got to bend your wrists.
Right.
So there's a lot of
Interesting.
changes.
That's interesting because then it's timing too. I mean, you get in, then you have to get out, and then extra little bit to get out.
I mean, it feels
Slows down.
unnatural. And the other thing is that this is a very strong position because you're not using your biceps, you're using your entire shoulder group.
Yeah.
It's super strong.
That's really
Too,
cool.
that I've also seen people push out like that. And that's what really causes a lot of,
Huh.
yeah, like
Well,
Adrian
you
Martelli
can
was
push
working
out
with
with your
us about this.
thumb, again, in
Yeah.
a sweeping words. Push out with your thumb,
Yeah.
but as you come into the finish, you loosen your pinky and your thumb, and you can just tap down, take the pressure, and the oar just pops out. Oh. We'll see tomorrow morning.
But not everyone can just have that.
Exactly.
Are we good with this one? You want more? Cool.
That looks like posterior to me, but also, usually when you see that though, they've got more upper butt on seat. She looks to me like posterior with somehow almost no butt on seat. It's like two kind of crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
Her shoulders look up also.
Did you say unwholesome?
No, but it'd be a lot funnier if he said, no, they look up also.
Oh.
Her shoulders look unwholesome.
Oh, maybe that too.
You need one more?
Does it look like she's using her
Cover.
Yeah.
Put some sleeves on.
I saved the most subtle things for last.
Yeah.
She's pretty good overall too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but posterior, maybe.
Yeah. What do you think what's her primary complaint?
Lower back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Lower back.
Why is that?
The lumbar like has to get jacked up if they're super posterior, right? Like it's
Yeah.
inevitable.
Exactly. So
'Cause
that's
it's lowered
putting,
under flexion.
you're in posterior pelvic tilt, your spine
Yeah.
has to flex.
Yeah.
It can't stay neutral. So one little tidbit about her is that it's more of a chronic disc issue. And we had this conversation last night. Discs don't like flexion. Discs often, not always, prefer extension. So she is pretty flexed forward. She's one of those that as soon as they gave her the cue to like stick her butt out behind her, that actually helped her quite a bit. But I want to pause this at a specific point, and this is why I like slow-mo, and I like the ability to kind of like really nitpick these people, especially if they've been having issues for a decent amount of time. So I think we're, yeah. So there's your finish.
Those arms.
So she, yeah, she can't, she's not even, her arms aren't even all the way out and she's already at half slide. The reason being, she's got tons of, and I don't even, this is something everyone's gonna say is hamstring, but it's not. She's got so much neural tension, she's got so much nerve stuff, where like her body is just doesn't wanna be, she doesn't wanna be in flexion. So she's trying to avoid having her legs straight and being in a flexed position as much as she possibly can. Because if she can be, if she's here and doing this, she's like, everything hurts. And as soon as we put her a little bit here, she's like, oop, I'm great. So that's why, she's at the finish. She's great. She starts initiating everything as she's bending her knees because she can't tolerate that. And that's, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. How do you know what came first, the chicken or the egg? How do you know it wasn't hamstring tightness?
I rarely have people stretch their hamstrings, even rowers. Unless you're an athlete who's had a ton of like crazy growth spurts and things like that, it often doesn't stick. It doesn't really, yeah, you can do it and then feel really good when you go out on the water, but like, why does it keep happening? Why do rowers always have tight hamstrings? When like, if you stretch something, like think about my job. If I have a patient that has had, you know, if I say, okay, you need to stretch your hamstrings to fix this, and I'm gonna test them the first day they come in, and I have them stretch their hamstrings, and I, you know, test them later. My expectation is that if you're stretching your hamstrings every day, they should get better. But rowers always have tight hamstrings. My hamstrings are always so tight, I need to foam roll them all the time. Yeah. And what's not being worked? And the glutes. You have no glutes. Your hamstrings are gonna just be on fire all the time.
So stronger glutes equal better hamstring flexibility?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So what I find is that if I just offload their hamstrings and make their hamstrings just not have to work as much, it's better. If I have an athlete who bends forward and they're like, I can only go to there, which is a lot of people. So do you want to experiment? Can we try it?
So bad.
Okay, so bend down, touch your toes. And actually,
Like-
can you turn that way?
Yeah.
So that everyone can see from the side. Just touch
Not
your
with
toes.
my knees, right?
Yeah, just touch your toes. Okay, so we're, what, maybe 6 inches off the floor?
Yeah.
What I also want to look at too is like, what's her lumbar spine doing? Is it bent? Is it
Right.
straight? What's it doing? Yeah, it's got a decent curve. I would say you don't move too much through lower lumbar at all. You kind of get a lot through it here. So what do you feel?
Like right across here.
Right across
And
there.
then Here.
And then right in there.
Yep.
Come on back up. What I want you to do is, before you even start, kind of bring your ribs closer to your pelvis, engage your core a little bit. Squeeze your glutes, not a ton, just a little bit. You work on this with your kids all the time, so you should be able to do it here. And then go down.
Like all the way?
As far as you can go.
Yeah.
What do you feel now?
Just like in my calves now,
So
but not in my back.
all we did was activate her core a little bit, activate her glutes a little bit. She has no issues here, and none of that hamstring grabbing. Come on back up. So what I often see, you're good. Yeah, thank you. Perfect example. So what I often see is that if you can give the body some stability somewhere else, it'll feel better, because often that perception, I'll even say perception of hamstring tightness. I have so many kids that I can take their leg and do a straight leg raise and get them a decent amount of straight leg raise. But then they bend over and they're like, oh, my hamstrings are tight. No, your hamstrings are not tight. They are not short. There's a difference between those muscles being shortened and feeling the perception of being tight. Like, we could lie you down and get you to do a straight leg raise, and I bet it would be exactly where it should be, like 80, 90 degrees straight up and down. So if you can give the back that kind of stability that it craves, it doesn't have to like cinch the hamstrings to be like, what are you doing? I don't want to go here. So everything kind of falls into place when you just give it the stability that it needs. And it's not a hamstring issue. It's usually a stability issue, because 94% of rowers have hypermobile backs. So if you go to bend over and that back doesn't want to go, which her back didn't want to go, it's probably more from not like true shortness or tightness of those muscles.
Do you find that that's the same thing with the hip flexors? That's like really, really weak hip flexors as opposed to they're too tight?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think rowers' hip flexors are adaptively shortened. The hip flexors are an interesting one. I never stretch the hip flexors. I think that's another feel tight here because you don't have here kind of issue. And that, again, perception of, it's like when you get the kids here, if you can be here and you can be in a posterior pelvic tilt and you can be straight up and down, it's kind of all I want.
Yeah.
And then you have the kids doing this and they're in lumbar extension, they're like hanging on their ligaments and their hip, and it's not actually stretching their hip flexors, it's just throwing their, like jamming their femoral head into the socket and just crushing that.
Yeah.
So that's, I rarely have people stretch their hip flexors because, yeah, could it cause issues if they are shortened, yes, but in rowing, you're always in some sort of flexed position, even if it's at the finish. You're not, like we were just saying earlier, you're not fully vertical. You have some amount of flexion at the hip. Those are gonna be potentially a little bit shortened, but do I care? Is that the most important thing? No.
That's just one of the ones, like, that's such an easy one to, like, think or point to when, like, if a kid can't maintain his body angle going into the front end, right? Like, as they get into greater compression, they get, like, ripped down. Like, the first thing, like, a lot of people think is, like, oh, the hip flexors are tight. It's like he's getting pulled forward. You would say that it's probably something further back along the
I
chain.
usually say it's more, the only time I ever think that the hip flexor is causing an issue, I mean, when you're coming up to the catch, the hip flexor is completely shortened.
Yep.
Like, it is as short as it can be when you're at full compression. So it's not causing any issues. It's more probably a motor control issue of not being able to actually, like, sit up and get that hinge. It might be a more hip flexion mobility issue, like the hip joint might not be able to move. But in this position, the hip flexor is not causing any issues being shortened or being tight. It's more if I have someone who can't get their leg behind them when they're walking, and that's when that muscle is potentially shortened. And again, rare occasion, but that's how you stretch your hip flexor, right? So it's not being stretched with anything here. Yeah.
I would say too, I think, like, a lot of times, overcoaching the body angle.
Yeah.
Can be, you know, like, I think a lot of people, there's like this phase in conferences and all this stuff where everyone was like, well, you know, Olympic lifting, like, is this certain positions, you need to have your body angle at this certain position because that's gonna protect your spine. And I think a lot of people, like, have a lot of body angle coach, and it's really hard to hold that position when you're trying to compress them up.
Yeah.
So like a little bit more upright.
Right.
Like, well, you won't run into that issue with it.
You need the shoulders to be in front of the hips to an extent. Think about, like, if all of you guys who are sitting right now, I said, get up out of your chair. You have to lean forward. There's no way you can get up like that. Right? Like, you can't do it. You have to do some amount of, at least a little bit, getting the shoulders in front of the hips. And that's how I see body angle. It's like, if you can just get a little bit of it and get there, then that's all you really need. Like, you're not gonna also get up out of a chair like this, because then it's a whole another issue of, like, what's not working, because that's not right either. I have a girl right now who squats and her body's like here, and I'm like, that's not a squat. You need to do something else. So yeah, all good points. Time wise, where are we at? Can we keep going for a bit? Any other questions about this video? That was a good one. But yeah, interesting pelvic position, and doesn't really know how to load through the glutes and the core either. So technical takeaways, like, watch your athletes. Again, like, these videos, you guys picked a lot out of them, like, the first time, and then kind of just, like, confirmed it the second time or the third time or the fourth time. You don't need to have a whole practice, be one-on-one, watch all these things. Like, watch them just for a minute. Watch them for 30 seconds, 10 seconds, anything, and you'll pick up on a lot. And that, the things that you pick up, whether this athlete complains of any sort of pain or not, could make a difference from them not having any pain when you actually kind of give them that attention and teach them to do things. We talked a lot about the pelvis and where they're initiating things from, but like we also said, ask. What do you feel here? What's working here? Where are your sit bones? Are you sitting on them? I usually have the cue of sit on, like, put your hands under where you're sitting. If it hurts and you can't stay there, you're probably sitting on the bone. If you're not and you're tucked under, you're on the muscle, you could probably stay there forever. But like, most of these athletic kids don't really have a lot of glutes, but then also, like, they're sitting on them and they're like, ow, like, I can't really keep my hands there very long. Yeah, then you're sitting on your sit bones. So I like that cue, it's super easy. So we mentioned we're gonna talk a little bit about kind of the transition, and we can spend some time on it, kind of as much as you guys want, as much as time allows for, but we talked about adding rotation. You're in the sagittal plane all winter long on the erg. As soon as you go to sweeping, which sounds like most people do, little bit kind of combination of things, but you go to sweeping and then you're adding rotation, and that's not thoracic rotation, that's hip rotation as well. You have to kind of rotate through the hips too. You can also see that there's actually more mobility through the hips and through the knees on the water than there is in the air. So now you have more mobility as soon as you get onto the water of both of those joints, or those joints have to flex more. Sounds great, but then you do that on a hypermobile spine or a back that's just getting over being injured in the winter. And yeah, the water sounds great. It sounds like it's going to load less, but if you have to go into more hip flexion, more knee flexion, that's just more room for error and more room for that uncontrolled movement.
And an unstable environment.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to get at too, is like now you're...
It's like, oh, we're doing a lower load, but we're going like by 4s or 6s, so it's still kind of heavy, and also it's like bumpy because everybody's waking the hell out of each other.
Right. That is the thing that I have found during this transition period of these injured athletes. I've had multiple kids come back from spring break and say, first couple practices, we did mixed boats. My back was horrible. Then I was in the 2V once we kind of split stuff out. And then I felt fine because like I wasn't being all over the place. And that's something you can train. I had her, this girl, one of the girls who told me this, I had her sit on a physio ball. I had her put her feet on a BOSU. And I stepped the heck out of that BOSU. And she couldn't stand up. She couldn't sit up. She couldn't maintain her neutral pelvis. She was all over the place. It's a fun one. Try it. The other patients walking around were like, you're mean. But yeah, like if they can't sit on an unstable surface with their feet on an unstable surface and maintain a neutral spine while I kind of like tap the ball around, that sounds a whole lot like rowing, and that's probably why she had more pain, because she was just side bend all over the place. She was rotating. She was like sticking her pelvis out here, doing this there. Was not, that's exactly why.
And that just adds to the fatigue.
Yeah, and those muscles just can't do that. Yeah, didn't like it.
For that exercise, did you use like the round balls
Yeah,
or the
right.
flat ones? Oh.
See what you got, Peter. Now you're in.
Woo! Yeah.
Good luck, this is a tough one.
And so is this something you did to help show her why, and then also give it as like an exercise to train?
Yeah. One more. Come here. It's tough, but I can stay here. And I actually had bands in her hands too, and I had a bar here, and I was having her like press it out and stuff. But spine and neutral, holding it, it's tough. But you should be able to hold that. Especially this girl's a college athlete. Currently. I was, but not anymore. So you're here, right? And then I'm kind of pushing on this, and she's like, can't control anything. And that's why she has pain when she's in an unstable boat, because that's what happens when it's just her sitting on unstable things. That's not including everyone else who's thrown in every other direction possible. So that's really hard. But I know you cut me off whenever you guys want. We're talking so much. We'll go through this quickly. But the tricky thing with this is like we're saying that we need to do all these things, but when do we have time in the spring? Right? Like everyone's out doing all these different things. So like when do we have time for this? Because ideally you would have kind of built all this up in the winter, and now you're feeling great, but like you don't really have a ton of time in the spring to be like, we're gonna start this new program and do all this, and we're gonna have you one-on-one on the erg and do. Who's time for that? So kind of we don't have to go too much into this, but I wanted to kind of talk dynamic warm up. But then why? Why are you doing each one of these exercises? Because if you're only doing that, if you have this 5 minutes and you're doing these dynamic warm-up exercises, why not have them have more of a purpose than just to get actually warmed up? Have them each have some sort of goal of, I'm working this muscle here, I'm using these cues here. My research when I was in PT school was on injury prevention programs and how to develop them in middle school soccer players. And every time we changed an exercise in our program, which was often because we had to, kind of find something that worked, we sat there and said, why are we doing this? What cues are we giving? Is this sustainable? Are they going to actually do what we want them to do? Like, oh, do high knees. Why are you doing high knees? Are they just trying to get their heart rate up? Are you trying to promote hip flexion, because if you're just going like this, it's not going to actually do what you want. So make it purposeful, because I find that can be the most effective way to get stuff done, especially if we're talking right now. And then we kind of talked a lot. It's amazing to see what people show me. And it's not even just a bad squat. It's like, hey, do a squat for me. Where'd your body go? Why didn't you stay down there for a second? That's not going to activate anything. So like, have them squat, have them go down there, have them hold it for 5 seconds. Something to at least say, are my glutes on? What's my spine doing? Is it in neutral? Am I tucking? Are my obliques on? Are my glutes on? Okay, then push through your heels, then come up. So many squats are like 1, 2, 3, and like they're just all over the place. Make them deliberate. Tell your kids what you want from them, and actually make it purposeful and sustainable. Because saying, oh, I'm going to do this big program and it's going to be, half an hour long, that's not going to work. Because it's going to be like, oh crap, we got to get on the water, we got to get out before the novice boys get out because they take forever. Like, you got to figure that out, right? So, my last little spiel, and I don't know who was at the first coach talk. I got a little bit excited because one of my passions is sports specialization. So spring's over. As much as we love rowing, as much as I love rowing, don't do it. Take a break. All the research out there says sports specialization is bad, but most kids, especially the kids in this boathouse, are at it winter, spring, summer, fall, and then they do it again, and then they do it again, and then they do it again. And it's great to an extent, but then these kids just break down, and it's horrible. And one of my goals is to essentially replicate the study that I did in PT school on sports specialization with soccer players, to do it in rowers. Someday I will do that, but until now, all the research in all the other sports says don't do it. Rowers shouldn't either. Take a break. Enjoy the summer. Do another sport in another plane of movement. Don't be here all day. And that's all I have. And I thought this was appropriate because this showed up in my Facebook memories today, that I took this picture 6 years ago today on this river. So, yeah. So I know we went a little bit over, but if anyone has any questions, thank you. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to chat with me. Contact information is up there. We have an Instagram page at Spalding, and we do a lot of cool rower stuff on it. We're going to do more kind of coming up. Follow us. Upstream physios, because we're technically upstream. We're right down the street from here. And my manager's from Australia, so physios are what they're called. So, yeah, any questions, you can please let me know. I can stick around for a little bit too, but hope you guys learned something. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any other questions, comments, concerns. And I have cards if anyone wants other information, our clinics information. We have a little like rowing performance little card too. So
Would you recommend?
yes. So I love the squat. I think the squat, that's a simple one. We focused a lot on, because it was soccer, so it was a lot about preventing ACL injuries, and so it was a lot of like, can we get kids to stop doing this?
Okay.
And can we get kids to land really softly, because it was all like really hard. Trunk is upright. We kind of used something called the landing error scoring system, which kind of looked at jump landing mechanics and scored it on a scale. We kind of got like a point if it was good, no point if it was bad, and then kind of looked at it from there. And so our goal with this was to kind of replicate those things. So it was a lot of jump landing, a lot of things like that. So that's kind of what I would say for that. But with rowing, things that I love any sort of lunge with your actually like kind of twisting. Like I love lunge with a twist, but again, not like, okay, we're here, we're doing this. Like lunge forward, engage your core, get low, engage your glutes, twist. From every single segment of your spine all the way up. One that I love in the clinic that I actually thought of recently for having kids do with partners to kind of get that core on, because it's hard if you're like outside in gravel, like you can't lie down and do a lot of stuff. Come over here for a second. Little mini squats. Face me. Little mini squat. Make sure your core is nice and tight. Tuck your tailbone, because everyone wants to be here. tuck it, glutes, you gotta get closer to me though. Put your hands out like this. So now we're kind of like buddies. So he goes for some time, I go for some time. Hold really still right here. Don't move. Don't move. And you have to stay as I'm your buddy and I'm kind of pushing you around. Hold. Use your core. Use your core. Squeeze your butt. Squeeze your butt. Hold it. Hold it.
Oh, that's hard.
Hold it. Hold it. Hold it. Keep your tailbone tucked under you. There you go. And I'm pushing him around and then we switch.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't
Do
actually.
it again. I was slow on that.
Send it to you?
So that's one that, again, I recently was like, oh, I love doing this in the clinic and I have people here and I have them push against the wall, but like, why can't you do this and kind of be like, okay, you're doing for one kid 1 minute and then like switch and then you do it to me. And like, you push me around. And then I'm controlling rotation, I'm controlling extension, I'm controlling all of these things. Good at that. But I'm controlling everything. I'm keeping my trunk rigid as I then go and being moved.
Yeah.
So that's a fun one. I think could
We've
be.
learned that part of our body is to resist movement and resist the forces as opposed to a movement. It's not a bicep, it's a place where it's like that. So Dr. McGill talks about being super stiff.
Right.
Well, everything for him is like, how do we actually create this barrel around here so that all this crap out here can be fully supported like by
Which
this part.
I agree to an extent with,
Yeah.
because I think that's great, but also you have to be able to do a little bit of movement in rowing, so being able to keep everything engaged as you go into rotation is really important too. So things like, if you are in the weight room, being in a kneeling position, engaging everything, and like chopping, but like core all the whole entire time. And not just like, boom, like I'm going everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of really specific stuff for all those specific muscle groups. Like I work for days with all these people on this kind of stuff, but if we're thinking like practical application for a team for very, other periods of time, I think these can be good ones. So, yeah.
How about verbal cues that you found efficient for getting kids to engage the glutes? Anything in particular that helps?
I think it is important to kind of do it off the water first. Like it's really hard to train it on the water because everything's a little bit more dynamic. And I actually think as much as we love sliders, it's harder to feel on sliders than it is on a static erg. So I love like getting over the top of the fan and holding onto the handlebar and having them initiate their drive and like squeeze their glutes, push through your feet. Like actually push through your feet, because so many kids don't even remember their feet are there. They don't actually push through them. So pushing through your feet, engaging your core, and kind of just doing it more as like an isometric to start in that position, like over the handle. And then from there, I even kind of like back off a little bit, or I give them more. You need to be careful for yourself when you do this. Don't hurt yourself.
Yep.
You can actually, you can use a boat strap too.
Yeah.
Again, I don't do this a ton with people because I'm not like in a boathouse as much. But you can use it with a boat strap and do it. I'm here, and now I'm at half slide. Can you keep that initiation there? Now I'm at, almost towards the end. Can you keep it there? So I think, like I said kind of in the beginning, having almost like adding little crutches to the situation and then like slowly peeling them off. I like using a band around the knees, especially if we're talking like glute med. You really got to be careful cueing wise with that though, because you want to make sure they're not getting into the kind of other muscles on the lateral side of the hip. The TFL can be really nasty there if you're just like pushing out and using those muscles. So that's another kind of cue thing of like, do you feel that in the front of your hip and in your quad, or do you feel that in your butt?
While you're on the erg,
While you're on the erg.
How high up do you put that band? Like the
A little bit
normal
above the knee.
spot? Okay.
Yeah. So again, I think that's one that is great, but like cueing with that is really important because you just want to make sure that you're not getting into like other things that are going to cause that internal rotation.
What about the rotation of the feet on foot plates? Have you guys ever seen that? Like coming up to the catch and the feet sort of go out and then they come in, but the knees aren't buckling. Is that normal? Is that, I don't know.
I would say kind of engage through the foot plate more, but also like,
Is this an erg
are
or
they,
a boat?
Erg.
are they lacking ankle mobility?
I've not
Because
paid attention to that.
I like doing kind of like a knee to wall, like if they're in kneeling and the wall is here, I usually put my hand down. Like you should be able to get from here, keeping your arch lifted, keeping everything in neutral, coming forward and touching the wall.
Okay.
Like not just getting past your ankle. My pants are just something here now. I can't go much further. you need to be able to hit the wall, and that's not that with this.
Right.
Right.
Because if that's what's happening, yeah, those foot plates are gonna go out. So I would check in with that.
Okay.
But it could be kind of more of a control issue up the chain too. So
Yeah.
it's hard to specifically know, but my first instinct is like, can they actually get into compression with that ankle? And is that why they have to go into either eversion or inversion with the ankle
Right, okay.
for that?
If they rotate their ankle, if the heel's in a little, that does more glute activation.
In a little, yes, because it's more externally rotated.
She's going out.
How do you,
She's pigeon toeing. Yeah.
But you can get, even on the recovery, you do it less, but it just keeps your glutes
Okay.
engaged.
Yeah, I like that. I've never heard of that.
probably
Because they do move a little bit. I mean, they're supposed to move. So yeah, I've never heard that. That's cool.
She doesn't.
with posterior and anterior tilt, how do you correct it? I mean, is it like a flexibility issue sometimes, or?
I find that sometimes it is, but often it's just a control thing. Like they just don't know where
They
it
just don't know
is.
what they're doing.
I find especially with boys, girls can kind of figure it out, especially because they're often in one extreme. So you can like put them against a wall and be like, flatten your back against the wall, and they're like, oh wait, this is where I'm supposed to be. With boys, it's really, I like having people sit on a physio ball and just kind of like rock their hips forward, rock their hips backward. That is a tough thing I've talked to my colleagues about because we all have a hard time sometimes teaching people how to like be an anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. But I think the ball's a great one. I think using a wall is a great one. Put them in different positions. Have them be lying on their side. Have them be sitting on a chair, having them like lying on their back with their knees bent, with their feet flat. Like try so many different positions because sometimes you need gravity, sometimes you don't want gravity. Sometimes the more things that are in contact with the floor will actually kind of help isolate something. Sometimes they have no idea how to do it on the floor. I think it's an individual thing, but I do think the wall can be really helpful for that. Yeah. And the sliding seat, I mean, we talked about a little with Tom earlier, like send your seat forward, tuck your seat under you. You have now a moving seat to kind of tell you what you're doing.
And if you're on an erg or if you have a speed coach, if you shift the hip angle, you'll see it.